Welcome to the Panza Panza Forum. In the Yoruba language, the word panza is usually injected into poetry to express an uncomfortable, uncensored, and inconvenient truth. The Panza Panza Forum is candid conversations about the life of African immigrants in America as it relates to their adaptation to their new home. While some may find it easy to integrate and can balance between retaining the original African culture while accepting the culture of their new home, many continue to struggle to find a balance between both worlds.
Hello and welcome to Panza Panza Live. This is a podcast where we discuss the lives of African immigrants and their assimilation into Western society as they raise younger generations in a country that is quite different from their own. We also explore the experiences of children of immigrants as they balance the African and Western cultures. We present to you this informative, interesting, and expansive dialogue about the intricate experiences of African immigrants in America.
Welcome to Pansa. I'm your host, Kevin Seriki, and today we have a special guest with us, a Muslim chaplain, a scholar, and an advocate for mental health in African immigrant communities. Born to immigrant parents from Dakar, Senegal, he arrived in the United States as a child, not speaking a word of English. Yet, within few months, he became fluent and excelled academically. His dedication earned him prestigious Posse Foundation Scholarship, leading him to Carleton College, where he studied psychology and education studies. He then pursued his master's in divinity at Harvard Divinity School, focusing on Islam and African religious studies, and wrote a groundbreaking thesis on counseling for Muslim African immigrants in America. Beyond his academic achievement, he is deeply involved in officiating weddings, supporting couples, and addressing mental health needs of the community. Today, we will explore his journey, navigating dual identities, both as African and Black in America, the dynamics of African immigrant household, and the critical yet often overlooked mental health challenges within African immigrant communities. So please join me in welcoming Mouhamadou Diagne. I hope I'm calling your name right.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much. That was such a kind and generous introduction. I was thinking, wait, she's talking about me here?
Of course. Of course.
No.
Oh, so can you fully introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about your background to our audience as to where you were born, where you spent most of your childhood and adult life.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, and it's an honor to be here before you and your audience. So as you've already stated quite a bit in that introduction, I was born in Senegal. And what's nice about Senegal, what's of note is it's a predominantly Muslim country. So about 95% Muslim and 5% Christian, but we honor both traditions. So I remember growing up there. I was there till I was 12. I had holidays off for both Muslim holidays and Catholic holidays, which I thought was very special. So I've always grown up with like a culture of like respecting different religious traditions. I am what you would consider a 1.5 immigrant. If you don't know what that is, so there's first generation, which means you are the first in your family to come. And then second generation means your parents came and then you were born in the new country that they immigrated to. And then second generation, it means your grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. As a 1.5 immigrant, that means I came to the US as a first generation, but in the K through 12. So I went to school here. Specifically, I immigrated in the 7th grade, which was quite a time developmentally to be coming to a new country and not speaking the language and being African. So I was bullied a little bit in the beginning, not just from the white students, but also from African Americans. I encountered, I don't know if we'll have time to explore this, but I encountered the whole African versus African American dynamic, which kind of was a shock to me. I was just bullied. I was, accused of acting white and all that. And so threw me off at first. It made middle school not as fun. Then in high school, once I advanced into the IB program, things got better. And then in college, when I was at Carleton was when things actually reversed. I found that it was the international students from Africa who were kind of not welcoming to me, but that the African Americans actually embraced me because I had been in the US, and that the Africans thought that I was quote unquote too Americanized. So having that journey, that experience was quite interesting. It did make me more empathetic, have more empathy for both cultures, both Africans and African Americans. And now I'm at a place where I just root for everybody Black. Oh, and I forgot to mention Caribbean people as well, because at the end of the day, when we come to the US, yes, we have our own cultures, traditions, but there is a Black experience that we all kind of share in. And so I think it's important that we all learn about each other and build solidarity. But now, specific to my own upbringing, so I immigrated to the US at the age of 12 because of my father, who was a professor. He taught in Senegal for 20 years and then got an opportunity to teach in the US full time at Northwestern University. So myself, my twin brother, my older brother of 2 years, and then my younger sister of 7 years all came together in the early 2000s in Chicago, where Northwestern is. And, we had that journey, as I mentioned, didn't speak English. And what I will actually highlight there was that having a father as a professor had a lot of advantages. So one of the ways I was able to learn English so fast was that my father was already fluent in English. So he was able to help me and my siblings with homework. It was an advantage that I don't think many immigrants who didn't grow up speaking English had. But he was also very a strict disciplinarian. Like we would stay up, I remember, all night until 1 a.m. in the morning, completing reading assignments. And we had a dictionary right next to us. We had to look up almost every other word in order to get through our reading assignments. Thankfully, math and to some extent science, those have their own language in it of themselves. I was very good at math right away. It also helped that in Senegal, I had already seen a lot of what I was learning in algebra. So that was a good way for me to start excelling right away. Reading obviously took longer, but it was an interesting observation as I was every single day looking up words. And as the days progressed, I would have to look up less and less words and become more fluent over time. We also watched a lot of television in English, which helped us just get used to hearing and then observing ourselves understand more and more as the days went by. So as I'm thinking about my own background, I just wanted to add that piece. So that was an advantage of having a father who's a professor. I also mentioned I have a mom. At the time, she was a stay-at-home mom. Eventually, she waited till we finished high school to go back to school, get a GED and all that. So my mom is also a big source of inspiration. And it worked. As you've mentioned, I was able to earn a scholarship, get a bachelor's and a master's from 2 very good schools. My older brother also, he did his bachelor's at Northwestern, then his MBA from Harvard. My younger sister, she got her bachelor's at Barnard and then a master's from Rutgers. And then my twin brother actually did his bachelor's at Columbia and then a PhD at Northwestern. So I'm grateful. It worked. We all found success, and all of us are thriving in our own careers.
It is so powerful. Who says it can't be done? Even though you came to this country not speaking English well, you still push and you got the support from your dad and your mom. And that is the way to do it. Absolutely. Because nothing is impossible when you have a supportive family to help you through. Living in New York, I come across many African immigrants whose parents don't speak English at all. And they come from Senegal, they come from different African countries that is French-speaking countries. And it's very difficult for them to adjust in this country. Even with the children, they're having difficulties. But because your father is already in academia, that really push and help a lot. And I think that is what drove your rapid adjustment.
Exactly.
And I'm so happy that you talked about your experience with issue of identity when you came to this country, because many times, of course, we want to be in solidarity with other people of color, with people of African descent, but we have to also talk about the challenges we face as immigrants with these different groups of color, because we're denying that of our experience is
Exactly.
unique. You know, African American experience is unique. Caribbean immigrant experience is unique. So our African immigrant experience is also unique. And we have to talk about the challenges we face, not
Absolutely.
only regarding issue of race, but also identity and being able to navigate through different dynamics of American society.
Absolutely. I will say I got the chance to go back to Senegal this past December. And on the flight, I actually spoke with some Africans from who were younger than me, but had grown up in Chicago. And we were on the same flight, and we ended up having a conversation. And they told me that their experience is very different, that now there seems to be Africans are actually seen by African Americans as almost the epitome, like we want to be like them now. There's also this movement towards returning home to the continent. You know, I'm sure you've seen with Ghana and things like that. So it's been interesting to see 20 years later
Yeah.
how things have evolved. So that is promising.
Yeah, I think it has to do with many African musician, Afrobeats
Yep.
that is coming along, and they sing it, and they kind of like open their eyes to the continent. Also, because of the social media, they're watching so many videos on different part of Africa. I think maybe that's part of what
I
is.
agree. I think definitely. Yeah, because when I shared my experience, there was no Facebook, no Twitter, no Instagram back then. So that's true. The information is a lot easier to access. And TikTok has also just taken
Mhm.
so much higher. Yeah. No.
And I just want to ask you more to expand more on this. As a child of African immigrant, how do you navigate the identity of both African and Black in America? Were there any moment where this identity were in conflict with each other?
Mm.
You think that both Black and African comes with unique challenges? You know, I'm asking you this question because of many African immigrant children who are struggling with this.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant question. We could honestly spend the rest of the time talking about it. But what I will share is I remember distinct moments where my father discouraged me from interacting with African Americans and said, you need to stay away from them. You know, these people, and he had all these stereotypes against them. A lot of it was from the media, but we were also living in Chicago and there was a lot of gang violence, right? So it came from a positive place of protection. You know, he was like, don't hang out with them. There's a lot of guns and like danger. And they also don't work hard, but we do. So there was a lot of these things, like almost as if when you're an immigrant, success is everything. And you only align yourself with groups that are successful. And then you dismiss the groups that are quote unquote unsuccessful. And my parents believe that African Americans were not successful. So stay away from them, hang out with everybody else. So that was what they taught me. I never felt okay with that, especially because the elementary school and high school that I went to was predominantly Black, right? So like I couldn't not hang out with them even if I didn't want to. Then when I moved up to the IB program, even though my high school was still predominantly Black, I became one of the there was like 5 Black people out of like 70 students. So that did create a shift. So because of that, the tracking system, we did end up not having too many African American friends, but that was just because of the way that the school was set up. But again, like I said, the reversal then happened in college, right? With African Americans being most of my friends and Africans kind of not, keeping their distance in the beginning until I guess part of the challenge in answering your question and also just thinking is there's all these push and pull factors. I was initially pushed away from African Americans, but not towards Africans either, like towards white people. So I felt disconnected. And then when I went to college, there was another layer of disconnect, but the African Americans were kind of like the ones who brought me in. So I lived in the African American themed house in college for a year. I also took a lot of African American history courses, and I just hung out with a lot of African Americans. And so and to this day, my best friend from college, this was more than 10 years ago, we still talk almost every day is, African American from California. But I also stay in touch with my family in Senegal. And I just know that there are certain things that my family in Senegal will not be able to relate to in the US. So I don't talk about those things, but my African Americans people would. So that's kind of what I'm having to do, being like a cultural straddler, like navigating different cultures, but also claiming my own identity, both as a bridge, but also as like a standalone figure. Because at the end of the day, I work with everyone, I help everyone. So I'm just a very empathetic, individual. Um, and which I'll talk about later when we discuss the mental health challenges. We have to work really, we have to make sure we do the work to not let our differences keep us too separated. Because in order to advance causes of justice, the reality is we do need African Americans. There's just not enough of us Africans, numbers wise, to get as much done in most cities. And they have the legacy of advancing very successfully a lot of civil rights and social movements, right? So that's the value. But yeah, again, what I shared with you with my parents wanting me separated from African Americans, that's not true today. We've all evolved. But in the beginning, when we first got here, that was the case.
Yeah, it does. Because maybe at that time, environment where you were living in, like you said, there's a lot of gangs, a lot of violence. So that's the only way they could actually explain to you to prevent you from getting in trouble.
Exactly.
Or getting into whatever is going on at that time, because there's so many successful African American. Let's assume you move to certain neighborhood where there are middle class African Americans or upper class where they have doctors, professionals living there. I bet it won't be the kind of advice that will come from them.
Absolutely not. And I think that was part of what caused the shift when I went to college, because I was surrounded by wealthier.
Yes, those middle class. And then Carleton is mostly white.
It is. In rural Minnesota. Yeah, it's one of those schools that are called Ivy adjacent. So like Bowdoin, like Amherst, those types of schools. It was predominantly white, but I cultivated a very strong Black identity being there and, building with African Americans and Caribbean people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How do you see your identity now as a bridge between African roots and your American reality?
Gosh, that is an ongoing journey, but Islam is a good anchor for me. Being Muslim, being a practicing Muslim, because a lot of my culture in Senegal is rooted in Islamic practices. So by keeping that alive and then keeping in touch with my family, I feel like that's what grounds me. There is also an American Muslim identity that I don't necessarily align with always. Like I'm active. Part of the reason why I decided to go into higher education and not the mosque is specifically that reason. There is a mosque not far from where I live in central Massachusetts. And when I lived in New York full time, I went to the Senegalese mosque where there's a lot of North Africans. And so that helps me feel more comfortable because there's a lot of cultural overlap. There is also some racism in these Muslim communities, and it's a reality. So I have to be careful also.
Can you expand more on the racism within Muslim community?
Yeah, so there's this belief that Africans, because a lot of Muslim countries historically have enslaved Black people, a very different kind of slavery than the transatlantic slave trade. It was more prisoners of war types of slaves. Because of that, there is a internalized superiority from Arabs and South Asians of African people. And you see that in subtle interactions, at a lot of these masajids. But I will say that in urban settings, there's a little bit less of that. There's more because there's a lot more prominent Black scholars that are coming forward and be seen as experts in Islam. It's becoming reduced now, but there still remains this underlying belief that Black Muslims just aren't as Muslim. They're not the authority figure. I did experience some of that professionally when I became a Muslim chaplain at another predominantly white institution, different from Carleton, in which I just wasn't respected because of my race. Like people did not listen to what I had to say. They would challenge me all the time. They would try to get me into trouble, even though objectively I knew more than they did. and that annoyed them. So I ended up leaving that job after only 1 year because I was just tired. They were mostly from Pakistan and some Arab countries like the Middle East. I don't want to say all of them were bad, obviously, but it was enough of them where it was just like, I'm tired of being disrespected.
Yeah. And this is a part of the conversation we don't have within among Africans.
Yeah.
When it comes to Islamic religion or any other religion that we follow, in terms of the challenges we face, in terms of biases and discrimination, or, the lack of respect because you're a person of color, of African descent.
Exactly.
And we don't really address the racism that we experience among other countries. Just like you said, many of these Middle Eastern countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's part of, I think, going back to what is my identity. Unfortunately, I don't want to make this my identity, but fighting racism and fighting to be heard is part of the work that I have to do because, as Black people, we just have to work harder to gain the respect and to claim our authority in these spaces that I've had. And I've had to do that quite a bit in my career. That's why academic excellence for me is non-negotiable because I feel like I have to, there's a place of support where I was successful, but there was also a place of trauma. Like I have to know more so that they don't, challenge me or so that I can prove to them that, yes, I belong here. And I think that makes it hard for a lot of us to navigate, if that makes sense.
I just want to make it clear to the audience, you are not experiencing in your professional field, you are not experiencing racism based from colonial descent. You're
Correct.
experiencing racism from people of Middle Eastern descent.
Right. And that's because of the settings that I occupy. Like I'm not in mainstream settings, I'm in religious spaces. So that's the reason. It's interesting because white converts have actually been much more welcoming towards me, which I think is interesting. Because I guess there isn't this feeling of competition or feeling threatened within the Islamic space, that is. But I also don't want to generalize. There are some wonderful, supportive North African and Palestinian and Pakistani people I've met over the years who are in solidarity. But it's about having empathy for Black people. You don't have to be Black yourself to have empathy for Black people. You can be of any culture. And I just think that that's what our educational system must promote. No matter where you come from, including me as an African, I had to learn about the Black experience. We have to learn about this so that once we learn about it, then it's easier to build solidarity with other groups because that's at the root of inequality, I believe.
Yeah, even before coming to this country, I'm from Nigeria, and you have many. I'm from the South. I also came from a Muslim home. And when you have to look at the northern part of Nigeria, who was very predominantly Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
in northern part of Nigeria, they look at the southern part of Nigeria as not holy enough because they live also among Christians.
Yeah, that's right. No, I've read about that definitely in my studies of Islam in Africa, the Muslims in northern Nigeria. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. I didn't.
Yeah, so a lot of time, even because we tend to focus mostly on European racism, but we have to look at other aspects of, biases and racism and injustice that goes on.
Absolutely.
In other part of the world as somebody of African descent.
100%. Yes.
Because it's unfortunate that as an African person, and that's why we have a unique stories to tell.
Yeah, we do. It's distracting. That's what it is. And I mean, Toni Morrison speaks about this. Like racism at the end of the day, it's about distraction. It takes your focus away from what you need to do. And it's not part of our identity, but it's a skill that we have to have, just noticing it and then challenging it. And it's extra labor that is frustrating. But once you overcome it, I feel like you can do even greater things. And that's what I'm seeing right now in my work.
Yeah.
If that makes
Even
sense.
it does. Even for many of us, who, when we look at the many of these Arab countries, in terms of Christianity, we're able to translate, write it in a language. There's Bible written in Yoruba, is my language.
Oh, that's great.
But then when you talk about Islamic, where we use Arabic as a way to worship, do you think that has an impact when you have to worship in somebody else's language?
That's a good question. So we actually see it differently. We believe that Arabic is actually God's language, that learning Arabic is actually bringing you closer to God. That being said, Qurans need to be translated in all languages, and the central governing authority of approved translations of the Quran is located in Saudi Arabia. And they don't often recognize Qurans translated in African languages. So that is, again, part of the racism that we've been speaking about, right? Because you want Islam to be everyone who wants to practice should be able to practice, and they have to understand what the Quran says, right? Because even though it's written in Arabic and we encourage people to learn Arabic, not everybody can learn Arabic. And so we have to at least have translation available. And, so that's a barrier that directly impacts, our communities. When Qurans can't be translated in Wolof, or there are more in Swahili now, which is good. But because Africa, there's so many languages, right? There's only 54 countries, but there's like thousands of languages. And unfortunately, many of them are dying. So that's another barrier that I think Black African scholars need to, work towards. Even if it means we have to publish our own books, which it is happening, then that's that.
Because if you have to come, let me assume that the Saudi Arabian has to actually, let's assume my language is what God indicated that this is what you have to communicate with, is closer to me, because I don't think God actually discriminates which language you pray to him with or her with. You understand me? So if I have to pray in somebody else's language, how would they look at me? It makes me of somebody of a lesser person.
Exactly. And Arabs, the only quote unquote advantage of being Arab is that you speak Arabic. That's what an Arab means. Like, the true definition of an Arab is somebody who speaks Arabic. And back in the day, it was people in Arab regions. So like the Arabic Peninsula and a little bit beyond. So technically, people in Sudan who look more like you and me are Arab, technically. But that is not what people think of when, because Sudanese people, even Black Sudanese people, do speak the Arabic language. But that's not often what people think of, right, when they think of Arabs. So it's a built-in racist imagery within, and it's cultural. It's not actually what the religion teaches, but it is the culture. If you grew up speaking Arabic and you have to learn it, therefore you're better than this person, you're a better Muslim than the person who doesn't. And we know that that's not true, right? In fact, the countries where there's the fastest growing population of Muslims are countries like ours, right? They're not, like Nigeria alone has more Muslims than the entire Arab Peninsula. There's only 60 million Muslims in like what we call the Middle East. In Nigeria, there's 75 million. So there's a lot of Muslims. But it's about authority and power. They're not sharing the power where most Muslims actually are. And so that is what when I talk about the racism within the Muslim community, that's really what I'm speaking to. There is a similar type of racial hierarchy and tribalism that you see with the West white colonists and us. So that's something that we have to navigate as well, the power structure both against the West and white people who enslaved our people, and also Arab Muslims who are trying to control everything about practice.
Yeah, it's a very controversial conversation, and I think we need to have more extensive conversation on this.
Yes, thank you.
When it comes to Islam and African countries, because to the extent, even sometimes, when you talk to many people of African immigrants community and you talk about religion, even back home as well, some people cannot even differentiate what is culture, what is religion.
That's right. That's right.
And that's how deep this Islam, or even when you want to talk about Christianity as well, into defining who we are.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I forget who said it. There's a great Muslim thinker who said that Islam is like the color of water. It just takes the shape of where it is. And that's how it is. Like, religion is an embodied practice, and it's not, you don't have to reject your own culture to belong to this thing called Islam. Like Islam, it fuses into yourself and into who you are very easily.
Well, I want to divert our conversation to something, because if I have to continue to expand on this, it will take us the whole conversation, because it's such a issue that it requires even more than sitting down here on on podcast. Yeah. Divert away from that. So you graduated from Carleton College as one of the prestigious colleges in America. What makes this school a perfect fit for you? Because other people will tend to choose like Harvard and maybe Columbia. And I know Carleton is a very small liberal arts school compared to a big school.
I'm so glad you asked that. Yeah. So what was beneficial about Carleton is it's a small liberal arts college. And I knew even when I was in high school, as my friends were applying and siblings were applying for college, I knew that given my personality, I needed to be in a smaller environment. I liked to have that individual attention. I didn't want to be just a statistic. But there were a number of things that Carleton culturally taught me that was very helpful, because I know that one of the questions we were supposed to discuss is the African immigrant household. And as I mentioned, I grew up with a twin brother, and our whole lives we were basically together. We were in the same bed till we were 16. And then we were in the same classes. For a while, we even dressed the same. Even though we're fraternal and different people, they treated us like the same. And as a result, the household dynamic was one that was very competitive. Like we were successful, but it came at our parents. I want to believe it was unintentional, but they kind of pitted us against each other. Who has the better grades? Who's handsomer? Who's better at sports, et cetera, et cetera. And I just was never comfortable with that. And so us going to different colleges, he ended up going to Columbia and I went to Carleton, was the best thing that could have happened to each of us. And then later on, I would end up working at Columbia. So I observed this firsthand. Columbia is a very competitive, cutthroat environment. But you're not just you're competing against other people. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of how we were raised, to compete against other people. What Carleton taught me to do is compete against myself, to just identify my own goals and just focus on meeting them and not worry about what other people are doing, right? That was a huge shift that being in that kind of environment taught me. Because, you're there, you're encouraged to just explore, do your own thing, be quirky, et cetera, et cetera. And even to this day, in our 30s as adults, me and my brother, where we went to college shapes our interaction. We recently had like a fight in which, he would make these comments to try and get under my skin. And then I would just kind of ignore him and like not care. And then he would get upset about that because I just no longer play the sibling rivalry game, And so that was why I to this day feel very grateful to have attended Carleton, because it taught me a more healthy approach towards success, which is it's about you and your own goals. And you don't have to put others down to get ahead. You can still be nice, still be kind, and still be supportive, and, still be driven towards success. And I think that that's a very important thing. I don't want to generalize and say our African societies aren't that way, but I think that's what we need to cultivate, if that makes sense.
That's very common. That's since I've been doing this podcast, that's part of what many of second generation or 1.5 like you are complaining about, whereby the parents tend to praise the most successful one and say, look at what your brother or your sister is doing. Why can't you do the same thing? And I'm glad you're able to talk about that, because this will be an example for many people who will listen to this, or even many parents who will listen to this, that it's not a healthy way to raise the children. Everybody has to be an individual and be who they want to be and embrace their uniqueness, who they are. And even though two of you are twins, I don't know, are you the first one or the second one?
Firstborn, that was me, yeah.
Taiwo, in Yoruba, we call it Taiwo. Which Taiwo, they are much more outgoing, more social.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly me. Yep.
That's how we have it. But Kenny, they are social too, but they are more serious. So I don't want to generalize on that. But it's for parents to understand that don't pin one child against the other. And like I said, even that small liberal arts college, there's so much you gain from it. because you are dealing with your professor. Okay, it's a small size setting. The professor will have more time for you.
Mhm.
They are not busy doing research compared to big colleges whereby they have assistant professors teaching classes, because many of these professors are busy with their own research work and all that stuff. So I'm glad you're able to bring that up.
Yes, no, thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, because it's important.
Yeah.
And it also ties into like mental health and what we deal with as Africans as well. One of the ways we were competing was who had the highest grades, right? And he and I were often neck and neck, but I was also slightly below. And for a while, I carried that as, oh, I'm just not good enough. What being at college, one thing that happened when I went to college was I I always had trouble focusing academically, like with reading, especially. Like I would read entire books and just not know what the heck I read. And it would always take me forever to get through reading assignments. So there was my sophomore year, like my first year, I struggled. Like I didn't do well at all. Well, okay, I'm exaggerating. I didn't do as well as I could have. And then sophomore year comes, finals period, first semester, first trimester. We had the trimester system. And I am just like, okay, I am sick of this. I'm working hard. I'm doing everything, but I'm just not internalizing any information. So I go to the counseling office and I meet with the psychiatrist. Now, what I'm about to tell you is controversial given what I now know having studying psych. Within 15 minutes of us conversing, he was like, and based on what I told him, he was like, oh, I am 100% confident you have ADHD. And then he put me on medication right away, which again, that is not good practice, but that's what happened. And overnight, like as soon as I started taking the medication, things started improving. I could get through my assignments better. And it was a very emotional year and a half afterwards because I was like, wow, I could have done so much better if I had parents who could notice these signs sooner and I could have been diagnosed earlier. And, that is a common thing that new patients who experience new diagnoses get. So part of my job as a clinician often is journey with the client when they receive a new diagnosis because it's emotional. You reevaluate your whole life and what could have been. Right. So once I got that diagnosis, that also helped me transition away from, okay, I don't need to compete with others. I have my own A, unique skills and B, unique challenges. So just work on that and ignore everybody else. And sorry, go ahead.
I'm glad that you were able to seek help.
It took a lot because I'll say I've noticed, and I had gone to my father within my first year in the US saying, Dad, I just read this whole chapter, but I had no idea what I just read. And he would just be like, oh no, you just need to concentrate, which again, he's doing what he knows. And so it took almost a decade for me to finally be like, okay, enough is enough. I'm in trouble. I need to get help. And I felt like a rebel and I shouldn't have to feel like I'm rebelling just to, to seek mental health treatment. But unfortunately, out of African and Muslim households, that's what it is.
Yeah, I'm so happy many of these topics that you're bringing up, many of these experiences you're explaining, because there's so many of our children within our community that they experience the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have people in my family back home who experience the same thing, but there isn't the infrastructure for them to. So a lot of kids think they're just not smart enough or they're dumb, they're lazy. And it's like, no, there's neurological wiring that's different and that needs to be addressed. And we just don't have the language, the knowledge.
And even with somebody of academic background,
yes,
they didn't even know.
Exactly. So
and
that's
I've seen many people, even you could be in medicine, if it's not part of your specialty.
Exactly.
As a parent, you may just ignore it and say, well, just read more or pay attention more or this and that, without actually seeking help for that child. It is being lost as a result of not diagnosis, not getting help that is needed. The child may be rebellious in classroom whereby they are not following rules. They continue to get suspended. And the parents couldn't figure out, why is this child acting out in classroom? Why you cannot just sit down still? Why is it when I'm talking to you, you're looking into other direction? You cannot even focus on looking at me straight in the eyes. And many of all these issues has to be brought into our community because there's so many of all these things that we have no awareness of it. And being that our culture, the cultural background and religious background that we have from the beginning may part of the issue that hinders for us to get necessary help, and lack of knowledge of it also play a role.
Yeah, lack of knowledge. But there's also an element of fear as well. When you're an immigrant and you're trying to go through the citizenship route, you don't want anything in your record to affect you. I know this. So one of the people who have ADHD, often some of the symptoms is they experience episodes of like depression and anxiety, which I had at some point when I was in high school. And I remember there was a moment where we went to the doctor for our annual physical and we have to fill out this big questionnaire. And I like filled out, yes, I've experienced this. And then I remember my parent, this time it wasn't my father, but come up to me and say, no, you do not put that down. You don't need to draw attention to yourself like that. And which is totally not acceptable. But again, it's part of this immigrant mentality of don't just not be perfect, but just be under the radar, be not noticed, don't do too much, don't draw attention to yourself. Actually, this is something I had completely forgotten until I started preparing for our conversation, because I was like, yeah, that was crazy. That should not have happened.
And the stigma from the community, and saying, oh, that child, he has to take medication for him or her to calm down, for him or her to be able to function. Why can't you just pray it away? Why is the parents not believing enough?
Yes, yes. And that actually, I'm glad you mentioned praying away, because that leads us to the role of faith and healing. Because when your brain is different, you can't just pray that away, right? Like the way that your brain is designed and structured requires, intervention of some sort. We won't have time to go deep into this, but there are different beliefs around medication within the counseling world, and even within diagnoses and like the DSM-5, which is what we use. So one of the benefits of the class that I'm in right now, that I'm finishing up, is that there are a number of different theories around counseling, and some of them don't actually accept the medical model of psychology. And I lean more on that front. Like for me, obviously, if you have ADHD or neurological disorder, you do need medication. Like there is no research that suggests medication is optional when you have ADHD or other neurological issues. However, one way to bring in more Muslims and Africans into mental health, to destigmatize it, is to not lead with a diagnosis. Instead, to just focus on building a relationship of trust between them and yourself. Given my own background as an Islamic leader, I've found that actually has helped me build that trust faster among African and Muslim immigrants. And then instead of, labeling them right away, just listening to their stories, listening to, their experiences, their feelings, and what has worked for them first, and then make them feel like they're empowered to find their own solutions, and that I'm just like a guide, like a consultant kind of thing. Now again, that's a different philosophy. Others, they believe that the therapist should be much more direct, much more like imposing a diagnosis and a treatment plan. I try to be much more collaborative in my approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And we also have to look at those who may be diagnosed with very intense, severe mental health.
Yes. You will be on medication. Like that's not even. That's not even
somebody, because in order to avoid a child to be hooked on illegal drugs, we eventually lead them to addiction.
So that's the other thing as well. Yes.
I spoke to a psychiatrist who is actually specialized on this podcast. He specializes in addiction. That's part of the conversation that we had. Because we don't address the issue right away, especially when somebody is suffering from severe mental health issue, that they need to go to the hospital, they need to be put on medication. Then we're, doing the service to that person.
Exactly.
Because it leads to major drug addiction, that then it comes to diagnosis, mental health issue, as well as an addiction.
Exactly. And so you have to now try to treat two different issues, and it began with just one, and that's much harder.
It's much more hard. So even though we want to be able to approach, but we have to tell them the reality. When we're dealing with our community, we have to let them know the reality of things.
Yep. Yeah. And so what I try to see, and what's really important to me is that my clients see that I see them as a whole person. You know, they're not just a label, a disorder, and that they also have choices and they have they're empowered to make choices and make decisions that improve their lives. But obviously for certain issues like Alzheimer's, like epilepsy, if you went through a traumatic head injury, got a brain infection, that obviously is something much you know, your ability, your consciousness, your ability to be conscious and functional is impacted, right? So that's going to be a different sort of category. But
is that what influenced your specialization in psychology for your undergraduate? Then you later went to postgraduate degree?
yes.
Harvard Divinity School?
Yeah. So some of it is my own experiences and things I've seen. But what led me actually to Divinity School was while I was a student at Carleton, I worked in the chaplain's office all 4 years. And I felt I was like the student representative for the Muslim community. So I realized I really liked that kind of work. And then a lot of us who did that student job would then go on to Divinity School. That was like a common path. I wasn't sure about it at first, but you know, talking to mentors and things, they encouraged me to apply. And then I got in and I said, let's do it. And it ended up being a very good decision because even while I was in Divinity School, I started meeting Muslim chaplains and then seeing them do the work. And I was like, oh, I think I could do this. And so, yeah, that's what it is. But what I've found in the decades since I've been a chaplain is that there is some value in the more traditional mental health, psychological background. And so that's why I'm trying to revisit that right now with a second master's in counseling. And I just completed my first class. It was tough, but we got through it.
You're going to make it through. Don't worry. You're going to make it through. I know. I'm sure of that. So I understand you were college chief diversity officer at St. Joseph College.
I was. Yes, I was. That's right. Yeah, I was there for about a year. Yeah. So what happened was it was like a situation of perfect job, wrong environment. The school was financially they were facing a lot of financial issues and they began to not see DEI as a priority. So I just was like, okay, I can't be here long term. That's why I decided to leave. But I did love the job of being a chief diversity officer, and being a chaplain actually helped me gain a lot of very important skills, especially around communication, around building empathy and deep listening. Because, you know, I don't know how much experience you have with DEI trainings, but they really force you to look at your own biases, which is very uncomfortable for most of us, right? And it can lead to feelings of anger, resistance, especially in that environment. It was a very white environment. I'm like making people see that they're part of the dominant culture of the US, white, male, Christian, you know, heterosexual, able-bodied, can lead to many of them just feeling like they're under attack. And it's like, no, it just means you were born as part of the dominant culture. And I would tell them, as a Senegalese person, when I go back to Senegal, the ethnic tribe I belong to and the family I come from, I'm part of the dominant culture. I automatically belong, right? But in the US, it's different because it's a different dynamic culture. Like I wanted them to just get a bigger perspective that it's not about, when somebody says you have white privilege, it's not a reflection of who you are as a person, but it's more of the attributes you have and the environment that you live, right? Certain things just are easier. Like, you know, we spent quite a bit at the beginning of this conversation that we Africans have to worry about certain things that others don't have to worry about. If you're in a dominant culture, you don't have to worry about fighting racism everywhere you go. You don't have to, you know, worry about who I am, who am I? Can I say this? Can I do this? And you don't have to second guess yourself on so many issues. And so that's kind of the experience that I was bringing in that role.
So what's your view on the present state of DEI now from the present administration?
Oh, I think it's devastating. It's atrocious. It's the misinformation machine has been too good at spreading distrust about why DEI is important. That being said, I've also been very heartened by the resistance that I've been seeing of people protesting against these DEI cuts. You've probably been seeing what happened with Target, that when they quite brutally eliminated their DEI programs, a whole bunch of people just vowed to never go to Target. I'm one of them. And it's working. They're facing a lot of billions of dollars in net losses. So I do think I'm very upset with what is happening with DEI. I have a lot of friends at other universities whose jobs were eliminated, whose departments were eliminated, whose budgets were slashed. I do think this is temporary. I think, especially with what we're seeing come out of the courts, eventually these jobs and these structures will come back. I do believe that, but it's just a tough time right now.
It is.
If only Kamala was president. Oh my gosh. Anyway.
Well, it has to go to this extent in order for things to come back better.
That's
Maybe
right.
when it comes back, when things come back, it will be structured differently.
Right. Yeah, maybe they'll use different words, but still do
the same kind of job, because, DEI, of what I seen, and I've been involved in those conversations for a very long time, is only focused on race.
Focus on race. Okay. Yeah.
It's not actually including the diversity of different kind of, what am I going to call it? Different dynamics, just like we talk about. I could be, as an African, somebody of African immigrant who came to this country. You experience rejection just because you're an African.
Exactly.
So it's not actually a focus on race only.
Yeah.
And that's where to me, the problem is.
It's true. Like, I understand why the focus is on race, given the United States, but I also do agree that it can be a little bit of a liability sometimes to really get change to happen. Focusing on maybe ability, right? I mean, we spent most of this conversation this morning talking about mental health and neurodivergence. That to me is the greatest advancement that I've seen on this field. When I was in college, the language of neurodivergent didn't really exist. And I think that now that exists now, and it's creating it's normalizing a little bit more of having mental health differences and being able to work through them. So I do think, I understand the focus on race, but the other elements could be a greater entry point for some people, for sure.
Yeah.
So we also only use those to not talk about race either, right?
Yes. So I want to bring you to mental health in African immigrant community. I understand that your thesis focuses on counseling for Muslim African immigrants. What are some of the biggest mental health challenge African immigrant facing our community?
Yeah. Well, the biggest one is acculturative stress. So the stress of acclimating to the environment that and different people, there are individual and there are and social and cultural dimensions to this. Then there's also, a lot of depression and anxiety. Like, immigrating to another country can trigger responses that affect your mood, that affect your behavior, that affect your mental state. So, depression and anxiety and PTSD. I think those are the most common things I've seen. And with acculturation also, because I work in the marriage, I do marriages. And so I do a lot of marital therapy. When you are in an interracial marriage or an interfaith marriage, there are also additional dynamics that come in at play. I've also been approached by a number of same-sex couples as well. And that if we had more time, that could be its own podcast. But I'm often hesitant to accept those requests just because the way that my religion talks about that issue is there needs to be a lot of work there. It's not as the same as Christianity or Judaism on that front. But, when people are married or are about to get married, that's when a lot of these dynamics usually come to the surface, because they're like, oh, I have to build a life now with somebody else and build a family, which will bring in more children and more people. So that's when people realize, oh, wait, I have to work out these issues and figure out like how comfortable am I here? Who am I? Those kinds of things. So depression, anxiety, PTSD, but then under the umbrella of acculturative stress, which can also include other things like things that are as strong as schizophrenia. I will also say one of the gifts that the language of neurodivergence gave us is there are more autistic and people with ADHD than we'd like to recognize. One of the things that COVID did is it led to a big explosion in ADHD and autism diagnoses, not among young people, but among older people.
Older people, yeah.
Right? Older people in their 50s, through 50s. And with ADHD, I've seen a lot of women in their 30s actually was the largest group because you often miss the signs. Women are just better at masking the symptoms than men are, and there's research to back this up. So one of the gifts that COVID gave us is, more and more people are taking mental health more seriously and into their own hands. It means people like me, practitioners, are more overwhelmed with requests, but it's a good problem to have, I think.
We talked about it initially a little bit about the taboo and the stigma that is attached to mental health.
Yes.
Within African immigrant community. How do you think we can break this stigma?
How we can break the stigma? Well, it's the same answer I give anytime they say, how do you make change? Well, we have to start with ourselves, right? And in my case, I want to finish this master's program so I can be smarter about how mental health works and, continuing to promote my business so people know, hey, there's a great resource that you can go to and use, to better yourself and know that it's okay to have mental health issues. Most of us do, or more of us than we'd like to admit. And then the third thing is, and this is a hard one, and I'm actually figuring this out as I'm talking to you. I learned that 80%, only 20% of people go to therapy globally. And so that means the 80%, what are they doing to help? That to me is a crisis. We need more therapists out there, and B, we need more people to be empowered to seek help. Like there are certain things that you're dealing with that you may not think are a problem, that it would be good to talk to a specialist. So one program that I like is mental health first aid. It teaches, non-trained everyday people how to recognize everyday symptoms of the most common mental health issues. So depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. And then often the training ends with when you see these symptoms, you encourage the person to go seek help. So I think having more mental health first aid trainings would be very beneficial. I've done a couple myself and I need to do a third one because you have to renew their license every 3 years.
And I know you're going to do it successfully and you're going to be practicing. And that's why, because of the cultural sensitivity when it comes to therapy, in terms of how is it designed to fit certain community so that it could be very helpful for their treatment?
Absolutely. Yes. And Muslims, Africans, we have to be willing to push to seek help.
I wanted to ask you about African immigrant household and the dynamics of it. When it comes to African immigrant household, mother often shoulder most of the domestic responsibility. What are your perspective on this?
Yeah. Definitely male is the breadwinner and the woman does all the household chores. I mean, it's definitely, I've seen this, as I mentioned, I have 2 brothers and 1 sister. And most of the household duties often fell on my sister her whole life. Culturally, that's just kind of how people are brought up. So I've definitely seen this within my own household. Now we are more encouraged to participate. I mean, I live by myself, so I do all the chores. Cooking and cleaning is not a gender role. It's a life skill. That's what I tell people. But in our cultures, unfortunately, it's seen as a gender role. But yeah, so that is a big dynamic that is still very prevalent.
Because from many of the communities that I've been to and many of our youth that I've spoken to, and in terms of within the household, they have brothers, their sisters, the siblings growing up within the same household. And it seems as if it's the girls who does most of the chores, while the boys are just playing outside, acting up, doing all kinds of things without giving them any responsibility. And we have to challenge this kind of thinking within our community. because you are not just helping the boy. If you give them responsibility, you're giving them responsibility for them to be able to function when they are on their own. Because especially they are in America, there's no guarantee that they're going to have a wife who is going to know how to cook, who is going to
It's funny.
be the
You
one to
mentioned
shoulder the responsibility in the house.
That's true. It's funny though. There is, however, an extra, like a asterisk that we put in the gender roles thing, at least in Senegal. I don't know if it applies to Nigeria, but the boys, so like the young boys, are the ones who have to go to the store and run the errands. So they don't do the chores of the house, but they do have to go, for example, in Senegal, when we need certain ingredients for the meal, they usually ask the little boys to like go to the store and get them, buy me this, buy me that. But the girls are the ones who do the cleaning, the cooking, and all that stuff. So there is some responsibility on the boys, but it's not nearly as extensive.
Yeah, and we
it's
have to
funny
look how does that actually affect the mental health of the female within the household?
Yes.
Even the mothers who is shouldering so many of these household responsibility compared to boys.
Oh yeah.
If I talk to your sister, what will she tell me?
She'll have so much to say. She will have a lot to say. Yeah.
I want to bring this to faith and community healing. So as a chaplain, how do you integrate faith of Islam with mental health support when working with couples or individuals?
The belief system that people have influences A, how they see their problem, and B, how they see treatment. For example, in a lot of Muslim cultures, there's this thing called the evil eye, that if somebody is, saying or doing bad things, saying bad things about you, that it can manifest in difficulties in your own life. A pure traditional mental health counselor would completely ignore that dynamic in treatment. But as a faith leader, I would not ignore something like that. And I would use it in the healing process. In an ideal scenario, they would go to a trained clinician and then the imam. But I am privileged in that I have trainings in both, so I could actually serve in both capacities. I haven't had to too deeply do that yet, but I'm hopeful that if I am presented with that, inshallah, I'll do a good job. So that's one thing. And then religion also helps me with modeling good behavior and modeling like the kind of presence and genuineness and empathy that you have to have in order to help others. And as I mentioned earlier, there are certain counseling theories that are much more receptive to people's religious beliefs that it can be more easily integrated than places where if you're doing a purely cognitive and behavioral approach, and you don't look at people's humanity and existentialism and ontology, which is what religion brings, then you can never fully help them ever. So I have to bring in religion if it's something that is useful for them. Now, let's be honest, there are some Muslims who are not practicing, right? But there's no need for judgment there. So certain religious guidance would not benefit them, but for somebody who is practicing, it would benefit them. So I have to also discern as a practitioner what helps and what does not.
How can a religious organization such as mosque or cultural organization, community center become a safe space to discuss mental health within African immigrant community?
One thing that my mosque does, every Saturday, there's like what they call a halaqah, so like a circle for kids to learn about different issues around mental health. It doesn't necessarily always mean like clinical things. It can mean like time management. It can mean how to make friends, connect with other people, those kinds of things, and learning about American culture. I think more targeted, intentional programs like that around mental health would be very, very beneficial to help our Muslim communities destigmatize mental health. And also just, again, my mere presence at these spaces as a Muslim who is a mental health provider can sometimes, just my mere presence can help expand people's realities. And so I guess I have to just show up and encourage my friends who do this work to show up as well to different spaces.
And as somebody, it does make sense. As somebody who experienced all these challenges at a young age, I would say, What steps can the younger generation, in your opinion, take to advocate for mental health awareness in African immigrant households?
Don't be afraid to speak up. Number one, there's nothing wrong with you. Number one, everything you're dealing with is completely normal. There are people who have dealt with similar things. Number one. And number two, the worst thing that can happen when you ask for help is to be sent to somebody else. It's not to be turned away. You have nothing to lose by asking for help. And there's no shame, no guilt, no anything wrong with, asking for anything. If you're injured while you're going to school or something, you fall off your bike, you go to the emergency room, depending on how severe the injury is. But because we don't see our mental issues, a lot of people just neglect it. But it's like, no, we have to prioritize that. And there's research showing that, unfortunately, Black men in general are at higher risk of a lot of issues with both mental health and physical issues, because a lot of them just don't seek help. And it's like, no. So I guess telling them this information, like, actually, you're at greater risk of dying from these issues just because you don't seek help, not because there's anything inherently wrong or different about Black men. It's like, we are all human and we all need help. And again, being religious, one of the humbling things about being part of a faith community is you believe that you're a creation and that you need to rely on the creator. Humans, I believe, we're weak. We need guidance. We can't function on our own. And we have to support each other. And one way we support each other is through empowering each other to seek mental health help. And this podcast is also helpful. So I really thank you for doing this. And I hope people listen.
And I'm coming to closing anyway. So that would be your message to what message would you like young African immigrants and their family to take away from your journey?
Okay, good question. There's nothing wrong with you. You gotta go take care of yourself. That's the greatest gift you can give yourself and your parents and your siblings and anybody in your community that you care about. You being well. And you can't be well without being mentally well.
So how can our listener connect with you on social media or through other sources that you have?
So I'm on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, Modiagne 2. That's my handle, at Modiagne, Modiagne 2. And I also have a website, Mouhamadou-B-Diagne.com. I will write all that stuff down for you. And through my website, you can read about the services that I offer, weddings, as well as mental health counseling. So thank you.
In closing, Pansa continue to normalize conversation about the importance of community engagement, about African immigrant experience in America. I want to thank you, Mouhamadou Diagne, for joining me on Pansa today. You have given us so much to unpack: the silence burden, the cultural tightrope, most importantly, the tools to heal. I'm also struck by our guest embodies the power of resilience, cultural pride, the spiritual depth. His journey reminds us that navigating multiple identity doesn't mean being divided. It can be a source of strength and clarity. Thank you for your leadership, your voice, helping us all understand how to honor where we come from while building where we're going. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pansa Live Podcast. We hope to have you back with us in the next episode as we continue to explore the nuances of the African immigrant experience. If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at talk@pansa.org. That is talk@pansa.org. And follow us on Instagram at pansa.pansaforum. Until next time, remember to spread kindness and love. Thank you and take care of yourselves.